I was standing in the private banking office, my hands folded neatly in my lap, when the manager slid a folder across the polished mahogany desk. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said gently, "we believe this account belongs to you. It has been active for 27 years. I blinked. "I don't have an account here," I replied, calm but confused. "My aunt closed everything after my mother died." He breathed in slowly, the kind of breath bankers take before revealing something life-altering. "The balance is $920,000, he said. Then he pushed the folder closer. "And your signature is on the beneficiary documents." My knees didn't buckle, but only because I've spent a lifetime keeping myself upright no matter who tried to knock me down. Still, the words hit with the force of a confession whispered too late to undo the damage. My aunt, sweet-spoken, church-going, apron-wearing Aunt Lois, had looked me in the eyes countless times and said the same line. "The trust ended years ago, honey. Your mother didn't leave anything behind." 27 years of believing I was the poor relation. 27 years of scraping through life, working double shifts, denying myself things my mother intended for me. 27 years of trusting a woman who smiled like a guardian but moved like a thief. I touched the folder. My name was there. My mother's handwriting. Dates that aligned with the last months before she passed. The banker watched me closely. "We only discovered this because the trust is approaching a dormant account deadline," he explained. "It required beneficiary confirmation." A dormant account. Dormant like the truth. Dormant like the child I used to be, who believed adults were incapable of cruelty. I opened the folder with steady hands. Inside was a copy of the original trust, my mother's final gift to me. Created when she knew her illness was winning. Intended to give me a life she never got to finish shaping. And Lois, my mother's only sister, had buried it as skillfully as an undertaker. I closed the folder. My voice, when I finally spoke, surprised me with its clarity. "I'd like copies of everything," I said. "Every statement. Every withdrawal. Every signature. Every correspondence." "Of course," he replied. "There is one more thing." He hesitated, then revealed the final blow. "Your aunt was listed as the temporary trustee. She withdrew funds on multiple occasions. We estimate approximately $480,000 is unaccounted for. Half gone. Half stolen. Half of my mother's voice erased." I stared at the numbers until they blurred. And then something inside me, something older, deeper, quieter than rage, straightened its spine. It was the moment I understood. I would not scream. I would not confront her in chaos. I would not break the way she intended me to. No. I would investigate. I would document. And when the moment was right, I would let the truth stand taller than her lies. The banker asked if I was all right. I nodded once. But inside, my life had already split cleanly into two eras. Before the folder. And after. And after. I would no longer be the woman anyone could lie to. As I left the bank, one of the documents slipped loose from the folder, revealing a signature on a withdrawal from 10 years ago. A signature that was supposed to be mine. A signature I had never written. My name is Evelyn Hargrove, and I am 64 years old. I have lived long enough to know that life rarely announces its battles in thunder. Most of the time, they arrive quietly, like a bank appointment you almost cancelled because you had errands to run. At 64, I have the kind of calm that only comes after decades of being talked over, underestimated, or politely dismissed. I don't raise my voice. I let people reveal themselves in their own time. They always do. I live in a modest beige-sided home on Maple Terrace, a clean but unremarkable neighborhood where everyone mows their lawns on Saturdays. My life, until recently, had been a slow rhythm of morning tea, volunteer shifts at the library, and evenings spent reading history books that remind me how small and cyclical human betrayals really are. People call me steady, wise. The kind of woman who lets things go. They mistake gentleness for passivity. They mistake restraint for forgiveness. But I carry a long, quiet memory. My mother, Marjorie, died when I was 37. A graceful woman, always in linen skirts and soft sweaters. She made everything feel safe. When she became sick, it was my Aunt Lois who stepped in with a kind of eager competence, handling appointments, papers, finances. I was too deep in grief to question anything. I trusted her. I trusted the way children trust the grown-ups who came before them. After my mother's funeral, Lois sat me down at a kitchen table, a steaming casserole between us, and said gently, "Your mother had hoped to leave something for you. But the medical bills, they took everything. The trust was dissolved years ago." I remember nodding, believing, and carrying that belief through 27 years of tight budgets, frugal choices, and postponed dreams. At my age, most people look back with regret about things they didn't do. I look back with regret about the things I didn't see. And yet, when I discovered the truth at the bank, the account, the missing money, the forged signature, I didn't crumble. I didn't shout. Instead, I felt a familiar stillness. Because I've learned something important in my 6 decades. You do not need to rage for justice. You only need to be patient. I walked home from the bank that day, the early autumn wind threading through my coat. The folder in my hand felt heavier than paper, heavier even than the betrayal it represented. But beneath that weight was something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. A sense of direction. Purpose. A quiet fire that warms instead of burns. I placed the folder on my dining table, smoothed the edges, and whispered into the empty room. "All right, Mama. I hear you." Then I reached for a notebook. A fresh one. Because at 64, I am long past the age of accepting other people's stories about my life. The next morning, as I began reviewing the documents, I noticed something chilling. The forged signature wasn't just inaccurate. It matched my aunt's handwriting. My family tree is small, but the shadows it casts are long. My mother was the youngest of 3 sisters, Ruth, stern and unmovable, Sandra, gentle but distant, and Lois, the one everyone trusted because she smiled the most. I grew up believing that Aunt Lois was the stable center of the family, the dependable one who baked lemon squares and remembered birthdays. She and my mother were close, or so I thought. I assumed their relationship was woven with loyalty and shared history. Looking back, the signs were always there. Lois never complimented without adding a correction. She hugged tightly but kept emotional distance. And when my mother fell ill, she moved in with a speed and certainty that felt rehearsed. Still, families are complicated. You learn to accept the versions of people they give you. My cousins, Diane and Melissa, were raised under Lois's firm hand. They grew up polished, ambitious, impeccably mannered. I admired them, even envied them at times. We were never close, but I thought we respected each other. Now, looking at the forged signature that mirrored my aunt's handwriting, I saw all of them in a new light. I could hear my mother's voice in the back of my memory. "Lois likes control, sweetheart. Just remember that." It was the kind of comment that floats past you when you're young, too busy living your life to consider the deeper meaning. After my mother died, Lois became the unofficial matriarch of our fractured family. Holiday gatherings formed around her. Traditions bent to her preferences. I fell in line because it was easier, because she was all I had left, and because I believed she had protected my mother's wishes. Now I saw the truth. She hadn't protected anything but her own ambition. The more I reviewed the bank documents, the clearer the timeline became. Years of quiet withdrawals, small at first, then bold. A pattern of methodical erosion. A trust that was meant to support me gradually drained into her accounts, masked by forged signatures and misleading explanations. I wasn't just robbed of money. I was robbed of decades of ease, opportunity, and choice. But there was something else, something harder to swallow. I was robbed of trust. As I sifted through the past, I realized how much of my adult life had been shaped by scarcity. Renting instead of owning. Working instead of retiring early. Denying instead of allowing. And all the while, Lois hosted holiday dinners with expensive wine and remodeled her kitchen twice. Still, my anger does not burn hot. It burns cold. A clean, clarifying cold that keeps my thoughts sharp. Family betrayal is a peculiar wound. It doesn't bleed. It echoes. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being the obedient niece who believed polite lies. Just as I finished reconstructing the timeline, my phone buzzed. A message from my cousin Diane. Aunt Lois said you went to the bank. We should talk. I met Diane at a quiet cafe the next afternoon. She arrived in a tailored coat, hair swept into a perfect chignon, every inch the professional woman she'd become. She kissed my cheek, a gesture too warm to match the tension in her shoulders. Aunt Lois is worried, she began before the tea even arrived. I folded my hands. I imagine she is. Diane exhaled sharply. Look, Evelyn. She told us years ago that the trust ended. That your mother's estate was exhausted. We all accepted it. Did you ever see documents? I asked. She hesitated. No. But why would we question her? Why indeed? I slid a copy of the bank's summary across the table. Diane's eyes widened as she scanned the numbers. Especially the withdrawals, the trustee authorization, the remaining balance. Dear God, she whispered. She said it was all gone. She said the medical bills. Her voice trailed off. I watched her face as she absorbed the truth. Shock first, then confusion, then something like shame. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't know. Her sincerity was real. But sincerity doesn't undo 27 years. Your mother forged my name, I said calmly. Repeatedly. Diane pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. She always said you were fragile. That you didn't want to deal with complex finances. Fragile. The word sat bitterly on my tongue. The truth was that Lois had benefited from that narrative. A fragile niece would never question her. A grateful niece would accept whatever story she told. How much did she take? Diane asked, voice barely audible. Approximately $480,000, I replied. That's the conservative estimate. Diane shook her head slowly. I don't understand. She didn't need the money. She and Uncle Walt were comfortable. Comfortable. Renovations, luxury vacations, new cars every 3 years. Comfort had been curated with stolen inheritance. I leaned back, letting the silence settle. Does Melissa know? I asked. No, Diane murmured. She's in Arizona right now. But, you need to understand. This will break her. I met her eyes. The truth only breaks what was built on lies. Diane reached across the table, her voice trembling. What are you going to do? What I was going to do. Everything I should have done years ago. But calmly. Methodically. In a way that allowed the truth to reveal itself, without my voice ever needing to rise. For now, I said, I'm gathering information. Diane looked relieved. Too relieved. But she didn't know what calm can mean at 64. Calm is not surrender. Calm is strategy. Cliffhanger. When I returned home, an envelope was waiting in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of a withdrawal authorization from 15 years ago. And stapled to it. A handwritten note. She forged yours. She forged ours too. I stared at the anonymous note, my pulse quiet but steady. Someone else knew. Someone else had been watching the same pattern I had only recently uncovered. The next morning, I visited an estate attorney, an articulate woman in her 40s named Carla McIntyre, with sharp eyes and a reputation for precision. I laid the documents on her desk, each one arranged chronologically. She read in silence. When she finally looked up, her expression was a mix of disbelief and sharpened professional interest. Mrs. Hargrove, she said, your aunt committed extensive fiduciary fraud. The forged signatures alone are criminal offenses. The withdrawals, particularly after your mother's death, constitute theft. I nodded. I suspected as much. She leaned forward. Why didn't you question this sooner? I smiled faintly. I trusted the wrong person. And grief makes you blind. Carla accepted that without judgment. I can retrieve 30 years of records, she said. We can subpoena her financial accounts. We can pursue civil action for the missing funds, and possibly criminal action if you choose. I inhaled slowly. Criminal action. Even hearing the phrase aloud felt surreal. But I wasn't looking for revenge rooted in pain. I wanted clarity, truth, equilibrium. Proceed, I said simply. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a quiet archivist of my own stolen past. I collected statements, verified dates, matched signatures, and reconstructed the hidden narrative of my life. A pattern emerged. Regular withdrawals, always just small enough to avoid triggering internal review. Larger ones taken during major life events when she knew I'd be distracted. Documents notarized by a friend of hers who had since passed away. And then the worst revelation. 5 years after my mother died, Lois had transferred a significant portion of the trust into an account under her own name, labeling it caretaker reimbursement. Carla's voice was steady when she explained it. She paid herself almost $100,000 for caregiving. Without your mother's consent. Without documentation. I sat there quietly, letting the reality settle. It wasn't desperation that drove Lois. It wasn't need. It was entitlement, decades deep and utterly unrepentant. One evening, while sorting old family photographs, I found a picture of my mother and Lois laughing on a beach, decades before I was born. Something about it made my throat tighten. How did it come to this? I whispered. But the answer was simple. Some betrayals grow slowly. And they grow in silence. 3 weeks into the investigation, Carla called with a new update. Evelyn, she said, her tone sharpened. We found a second hidden account. This one was opened in your name. By your aunt. The discovery of the second hidden account shifted something fundamental inside me. It was smaller, just under $100,000. But what mattered was the intent. My aunt had not merely siphoned funds from my trust. She had constructed the architecture of an alternate financial identity for me, one that only she controlled. Carla laid the documents before me. This is deliberate, she said. Premeditated. She opened this account when you were 42. Why? I murmured. Because it allowed her to move money with your name attached. It minimized suspicion. I sat back in my chair. The room felt colder, as though some unseen window had been opened. You have a strong case, Carla continued. But here's the question I need to ask. Do you want to settle this quietly, or do you want full exposure? Full exposure. The phrase carried weight. At 64, I no longer feared the collapse of relationships built on false pretenses. I no longer worried about who would whisper what at holiday dinners. Truth has a way of rearranging family trees. I want everything documented, I said. If she tries to deny it, I want the truth to answer for me. Carla nodded. I thought so. In that case, we'll prepare for deposition. Over the next month, I gathered every piece of evidence with deliberate patience. Not out of vindictiveness, but out of respect for myself. For my mother. For the decades that had been quietly rewritten by someone who saw my inheritance as her opportunity. I wrote Lois a letter requesting a conversation and asking her to meet me at my home. I kept it simple, polite. I knew she wouldn't refuse. She would come believing she still held influence over me. But the woman she remembered, the obedient, unquestioning niece, was gone. The evening before our meeting, I sat at my dining table, reviewing the final binder of evidence. My mother's trust documents rested beside my teacup, illuminated by the warm glow of a lamp. I placed my hand on the folder. I'll take it from here, I whispered. I slept deeply that night, the calm sleep that comes when you step fully into your own strength. When Lois arrived the next afternoon, She entered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Evelyn, dear," she said, glancing nervously at the documents on the table. "Diane said you've been confused about some old accounts." Confused. The word was almost laughable. I gestured for her to sit. She did, her posture perfect, her composure polished. But her eyes flickered, just once, when she saw the binder. "Aunt Lois," I said in a level voice, "we're going to talk about the trust." Her smile tightened. "There is no trust." I opened the binder. Page 1. The original trust document. Her signature. My mother's handwritten note. Lois's face drained of color. Before she could speak, I placed one more document on top, a copy of the forged signature. Then I asked calmly, "Why did you sign my name?" For a long moment, Lois didn't speak. Her eyes darted from the forged signature to my face, searching for some softness, some forgiveness she could use as a foothold. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't emotional. I was simply present. And presence, when grounded in truth, is its own kind of reckoning. Finally, she exhaled shakily. "I did what I had to do," she whispered. "No," I replied. "You did what you chose to do." Her jaw tightened. "I took care of your mother. I handled everything. I managed the chaos. I sacrificed." "You stole," I said gently. "And you justified it." Her mouth snapped shut. I opened another document, the record of transfers into her personal account. "This wasn't reimbursement," I continued. "This was theft." She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "You don't understand what I carried." "I do," I said. "You carried the trust. And you spent it." She stood abruptly. "Enough. I won't sit here and be attacked." "You're not being attacked," I replied. "You're being held accountable." Accountability, a word that strikes harder than accusation. I informed her that my attorney had already filed notices to preserve financial records, and that failure to cooperate would result in a court order. The blood drained further from her face. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "I already have." Something inside her collapsed. She slowly sank back into her chair. "Evelyn," she murmured, voice shaking, "I didn't think you'd ever find out." There it was. The truth behind the truth. She didn't regret the theft. She regretted being caught. Her downfall began not with shouting, not with dramatic revelation, but with a simple, unavoidable reality. The truth was documented. And documentation does not blink. Within days, she received legal correspondence. Within weeks, her accounts were subpoenaed. Within months, the extent of her wrongdoing was undeniable. My cousins learned the truth in pieces, each revelation another crack in their foundation. Diane cried. Melissa became quietly furious. Both apologized to me repeatedly, their identities shifting as they confronted the mother they thought they knew. Lois withdrew from the world. She resigned from her church committees, stopped hosting dinners, stopped answering calls. Her silence was her confession. In the end, she negotiated a settlement, transferring what remained of the stolen funds and liquidating assets to repay a portion of the loss. It wasn't everything. It never could be. But justice rarely arrives in a perfect shape. It arrives in a shape you can live with. And I could live with this. On the day her final payment was transferred, Lois sent me a letter. A short one. Just a single line. "I did what I thought I deserved." I stared at it, realizing the sentence revealed more than she intended. After the case settled, my life didn't transform overnight. Justice is not a magic wand, it's a recalibration. A return to balance. With the recovered funds, the restored trust, and the knowledge of what had been hidden from me for so long, I finally made choices without the shadow of scarcity. I renovated my kitchen. I purchased a small piece of land my mother once dreamed of owning. I funded scholarships at the local library. But more importantly, I exhaled in a way I hadn't in decades. One quiet morning, I sat on my porch with a cup of Earl Grey, watching the sunrise tint the sky soft gold. The world felt wide again, open, honest, unthreatened. I realized I had not only reclaimed my inheritance, I had reclaimed my narrative. My cousins reached out often. At first with guilt, then with something resembling genuine affection. They were navigating their own grief, a living mother whose legacy had fractured. I responded with compassion, but boundaries too. Healing does not require forgetting. As for Lois, she moved to a smaller home outside town. We did not speak again. Not out of hatred, but out of completion. Some relationships end long before the betrayal is discovered. In the quiet that followed the storm, I found myself reflecting on my mother. I wondered if she had sensed her sister's envy. If she had hoped I'd one day uncover the truth. Or if she simply believed the best in people until the very end. I visited her grave on a breezy autumn afternoon, the same kind of afternoon she always loved. I placed fresh dahlias beside her stone and sat on the cool grass. "I found what you left me," I said softly. "And I'm taking good care of it now." The wind stirred, gentle but present, and I let myself believe she heard me. Walking back to my car, I felt a peace I had not known since my youth. Not a naive peace, but a seasoned one. A peace shaped by clarity, by resilience, by the knowledge that justice had been reclaimed without bitterness consuming me. The truth had not destroyed me. It had refined me. That evening, while organizing some old family boxes, I found a sealed envelope addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. I had never seen it before. I opened the envelope with careful hands. The paper inside was yellowed but intact, my mother's handwriting looping gently across the page. "My Evelyn," it began. "If you are reading this, it means time has moved forward in a way I cannot. I want you to remember one truth above all others. Trust the quiet voice inside you. It may whisper, but it never lies." I paused, swallowing the weight of her words. "I have left you resources to build the life you deserve," the letter continued. "I cannot predict what others will do with their own fears or desires. But I know your heart. I know your strength. And I know you will find your way if the road ever bends." At the bottom was a single sentence that felt like a gift delivered across decades. "You are more powerful than anyone realizes." I folded the letter and held it to my chest, the final confirmation that my mother had known who I would grow to be. A woman who does not shout to be heard. A woman who does not break when betrayed. A woman who understands that revenge rooted in truth is not revenge at all, but restoration. As I sit here now, sharing this story, I offer the lesson it carved into me. Justice doesn't require rage. Truth doesn't require permission. And peace doesn't require reconciliation. It requires clarity. People may betray you quietly, subtly, over years so long you stop noticing the erosion. But documentation, patience, and courage can rebuild what was stolen in silence. When someone lies to you, they fear your strength. When you uncover the lie, you reclaim it. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply living the life they tried to take from you. So if you find yourself doubting a feeling, a discrepancy, a memory that won't sit still, listen to it. Investigate. Document. Ask questions. Calm confrontation can move mountains more effectively than anger ever could. My story is not about money. It's about the restoration of self. And in the end, the truth didn't just expose my aunt's deception. It illuminated my mother's faith in me. Faith that waited 27 years to be found. If you've stayed with me through this journey, then take this with you. When the world insists you accept a lie, hold steadfast to your quiet knowing. Because even dormant truth eventually demands to be seen.